I'm Dale Levesque. I work at Tierpoint. I'm a director of product there. I own DRAS, backup in our portal. Normally, Matt Ricky would be up here. He's our VP of Professional Services, but yeah, the kids graduated. We also have Bob, Colombian. You can say it wrong. He runs our migration and DRAS install team, and so we'll be going over a couple of use cases. So, how many of you guys out here have attempted migrations? Many? And how many had some major issues? Yeah, so all of you guys that raised your hands with the migration, raise your hands. And you know what? When they asked me to do this, I was going over the deck, they recorded it for me, and it was kind of a marketing pitch, and I was like, I don't want to talk about marketing. I want to talk about how we had the same problems. We did. So if I look back to like 2012, I wasn't working on the cloud side. I was working on our small business side, thinking about desktop as a service. But then we brought to market a SaaS-based migration tool. And it sounded great. We were partnering with this cool company. Customers were going to be able to go out and self-service migrate into our cloud. And the world was golden. And then we sold a couple, and the customers weren't happy. And they weren't happy because migrations just aren't that easy. There were actually really kind of three main reasons, if you ask me. Number one, I mean, if you look at the tool sets out there for migrations, the one that we used anyway, it was backup based. It was not continuous replication. So imagine the downtime that you're going to have just to migrate your server up. Yeah, you can get that initial copy. Yes, you can do a sync, but you still have to schedule time, and you may lose transactions. You're not going to be able to do that this day and age. So customers didn't like it for that. Number two, it was SaaS based. The company was relatively small, and they promised us a lot as long as sales came. Well, it was a cart and horse. So all the features that we needed weren't there. If sales came, they would put them in. But our customers couldn't use the platform, and our sales folks wouldn't sell it because the features weren't there. So it would fail. We couldn't even, I think we could only migrate, and this is 2012, mind you, Windows 2003 VMs. It wasn't very helpful. And then number three was, there was the expectation that migrations are easy. And what we found was customers would go in, they put a server up, and if any of you guys run DRAS and do testing, you know just putting that server into the cloud doesn't solve for much. I mean, it solves a big chunk, but there's a lot of other networking, firewall, application dependencies that are out there. So, you know, that failed. So we kind of stopped. We didn't have a professional service. We didn't have a product around it. Well, in 2016, our Windstream Hosted Solutions got bought by Tierpoint. And in about 2016, what they decided is, hey, we need a professional services team. So our professional services team, the initial team itself, was driven strictly by migrations. At the time, including the VP that hired 3 people, that team has grown to 20 now. But it's grown on the back of Zerto. And I'll be honest with you, what happened at first when we started building that team, we obviously wanted to get revenue generating into that professional services right then. So we said, you know what? As a stopgap measure, let's just go ahead and use Zerto. So we started using Zerto. We had people in our service delivery team. Robert is sitting up here that knew how to install Zerto. We could, we could start migrating, but we still had we call it PDLC, product development process going on where we were out there and we were looking at other data movers. Was it double take? Was it Commvault? Was it, whatever other migration tools were out there? As we're doing this, we're like, hey, we're already using a great product. These other ones can't even stand up because of all the automation, because of everything, all the feature sets in Zerto. It just, that continuous replication, the automation, the ability to test before you bring things up, really just helped amplify that business to us. And now, half of his team is funded from migrations, or half of the DRAS and migration side is funded just from migrations. And it's been great. If you look kind of at the scale here, what we're finding as we're growing is there's usually 3 types of customers: conservative, moderate, and aggressive. And conservative, think of that, to me, I think of that as people that are highly regulated. They go in, they only want to consume colo from us. They may want from some infrastructure as a service where we just resell hardware. They still want to control the VMware stack or the Hyper-V stack. In the middle is the moderate customer, and this is where we play all day long. This seems to be our sweet spot, especially at They'll consume colo. They also may want some private cloud, some managed cloud, right? So they'll want us to manage the hypervisor. They only want to consume the OS. They primarily buy, but they like to use our multi-tenant cloud for DRAS or for dev tests. So they're really private cloud focused. And then we have the aggressive customer that's the born in the cloud type person. You know, they're consuming Office 365. They never had to migrate away from Exchange. They never had to, they were already in hyperscaler, so they just care about applications. They don't care about the platform whatsoever. They could care less if you're running Kubernetes or if you're running VMware hypervisor. Like, they don't care as long as their applications are going. And so we see that. And the good thing about Zerto is it allows us to really hit about 90% of our migrations. Sure, there are some physical machines, and you're going to have to use another tool for that. And I'm not going to talk about that other tool now, but if you want to talk about what we use, I can talk about it later. But it helps us, whether it's, you know, coming into a private cloud from us, maybe a customer just wants to go from their on-prem into a colo cloud that they manage, going into public clouds, going from one public cloud to another public cloud, or even hybrid. You know, the great thing, and what I see a lot, especially in our enterprise customers, as they come in, they also want DRAS. So it's one file swoop. We can fix a couple issues, the migration and the DRAS, because of the multi-site. I don't know if you guys have used DRAS or Zerto's multi-site, but we can replicate off to 2 different clouds, and they can test, right, and then fail over into their new cloud and still have their DRAS up and running. Or in other circumstances, instead of running 2 clouds simultaneously, we've had customers come in, they'll replicate up, test in a multi-tenant cloud in a hyperscaler. They'll fail over to that, and then they'll fail back to their new cloud. So it really helps us, you know, hit a lot of those different pieces. Finally, like as you're thinking about migrations, and one of the biggest, I told you one of the failures we had was that migration is easy. It really comes down to the assess. Those that did migrations, like how much work did you put into actually assessing your environment ahead of time? Did you use RD tools or did you use Cloudscapes? Like the problem, and you don't have to answer, is most people think, hey, I can take an RD tools output and that'll be okay. And it's really not. It's not enough information. We need to know how the data is flowing from one place to another. We need to know how how much is your change rates. We need to know how big everything is. So that way we can design, work with the customer or you work internally to design a right-sized cloud, not just any cloud. Because number one, what we see a lot of times is people underestimate what they need. That happens a lot, especially as you know, our sellers are trying to get in there, customers pushing for lower cost. If you guys even are not a consumer of that, I'm sure your boss is pushing you to keep the cost as low as possible. On the other hand, you don't want to design too big either, right? You want to right size it. You don't want to spend money that you don't have to. So putting that. And then comes along Bob and team, right, where they start building this. You got to have somebody assigned. Hopefully you have a project management team internally. If not, you as the IT guy is going to have the project management. But there is steps. And you have to take a really, just really make sure that you're following a roadmap to get you to where you need to be. Making sure that you're testing, making sure that hey, everything's accounted for. Are you doing any user tests on the weekend when you don't have that much traffic before you fully commit to migration? Because the worst thing you can do is fully commit to a migration and then it fail, right? And then trying to fail back, if you don't have something like Zerto that can easily fail you back, is going to be really tough. That's probably enough about process, and I know I'm probably over my time, so
you're fine.
Yeah.
So as we look at the at migrations, and we've kind of got 2 case studies we put up here. The first one is a medical supply manufacturer that we had worked with, where not only did they want to migrate into Tierpoint, but they also wanted DRAS running at the same time. So they wanted us to have DRAS running before the migration, during the migration, and after the migration, which becomes a bit of a challenge in doing that. So one of the really nice points of Zerto is the one-to-many tool license key that Zerto offers. Because what it actually allowed us to do was to actually do both things at once. We were able to get them set up for migration, and at the same point in time, set up their DRAS to their final location to where they were going to do their disaster recovery to in a multi-tenant cloud environment. So what we did was we basically had to build multiple VPGs, one for the migration and one for the DRAS. And it allowed us to keep them protected. They wanted to go ahead and do the migration and then re-protect. So what we ended up having to do in order to accomplish all of that is we set up, like I said, 2 VPGs, one to their data center for their final location for the production, and one to their DR site. We allowed Zerto to get fully seated and get everything up and running. It allowed us to test not only their production site with them in the isolated bubble, but also allowed us to test their DR site to make sure all the servers were going to come up over there, allow them to see performance, look at the environment, kind of kick the tires and see what was going on and make sure everything looked good. Then once we were able to accomplish those tests, we then went back to the customer and said, okay, when do you want to migrate? So then we go ahead and do their migration. And to us, it's just DRAS and we fail them over at the end. So we treat a migration as a DRAS project with just a fail over at the end. We failed them over. Now the trick is, how do you keep them from having to re-protect and wait for that synchronization to happen now that they're in their new production site? Well, with Zerto, when we go ahead and delete those VPGs, one of the nice options is retain the disks. So we deleted the VPG to their DR site and said, okay, hold on to those VMDKs, we're going to use them again. And then we create a third VPG that says, okay, now we're going to protect this server to this new DR site, and hey, by the way, I've got the disks to pre-seed. So Zerto kicks up, grabs those disks, pulls them in, and then the only thing Zerto's got to do is a delta sync. So when we managed to migrate them over a weekend, they only had a delta sync about 24 hours of missing data. So it made it real easy for that customer to stay protected, to migrate them and stay protected with DRAS with limited risk to their environment. So the other really good one, I think I went the wrong. Did I go the wrong way? There we go. The other one that we do a lot of migrations on is where we're moving the customers between Hyper-V and into the VM world that we run. And one of the really nice things about Zerto is Zerto can actually handle that. It does take a little work to do it. It's not the simple, hey, create a VPG and go, because Hyper-V has some different drivers it uses. So one of the real big challenges is when you want to do a migration between the different hypervisors, you've got some driver issues, and I'll need to say Hyper-V does not use VM tools. So you can't re-IP the server and all of that. But with Zerto and with the way things get done, we're actually able to solve that, because we can go ahead and load the NIC and the disk drivers ahead of time on the server in the Hyper-V world. We can even load VM tools ahead of time. It's just going to sit there dormant. And then just treat it like anything else. Protect them with a VPG. And once the migration occurs and the server starts up, between Zerto and the OS, it recognizes that it has the drivers it needs to run. It uses the SCSI drivers. It uses the NIC drivers, and it starts the server up. And you have control, because the VM tools will come up as soon as the server comes up. So that's one of the beauties and the powers of Zerto, is it allows us to go from one environment to another, and makes migrations a lot easier, because trying to do it the old way of exporting and importing is not really a fun option.
So how long does it normally take, say you have the environment, the physical hardware or the PSX host stood up, how long does it take a migration from start to finish?
Well, it's all dependent on how many servers, how much storage you have. Once the seeding is done, we can run about 10 to 12 servers an hour, and that's with the customer's involvement, checking the servers as we bring them up, because it's not a shotgun, here they all start. We want to start them so the domain controllers come up, the database servers come up, the applications come up, bring them up in the order in which you would expect them to do. And that's one of the things we do with the customer, is we look at their application stack. We ask what order do your servers need to come up? You can't start a SQL server if your AD is not running. So part of our assessment that the pro services team with Tierpoint does is they look at your applications and help work out what order to start the servers in. So that when we do your migration, we're trying to reduce the number of times of a reboot or getting things up in the right order, or an application not starting because the SQL wasn't ready. So that is a lot of what our pro services team does in the assessment, is determine the proper order to bring things up in.
I think you made another good point. Seeding, right? That's probably one of our biggest, or longest poles in the tent, I should say. Especially if you're in the same data center, it's not going to be that long. But if you have to move across the wire to another data center or a hyperscaler, it really is based on your bandwidth, and it can chew up your bandwidth. And we see customers, just way under a lot of times, right? So as you're planning your migrations, just make sure you have a realistic approach to how much bandwidth you need. Maybe you can burst up, or how long it's actually going to take to start migrating the servers, because it takes a while for a terabyte to move across the...
It does, but there are some other options. Again, with the pre-seed that we used with the first one, where we were reusing them to keep their DR time down, you can use the pre-seed option as well in a migration. So you can clone the VMs off to a portable device, ship it over to our data center. We'll suck it into our VM, and then just as we build the VPGs within Zerto, we just say, hey, I already have these disks to start with. And you point them to your 1 terabyte file server disk. Now, chances are that VMDK now is potentially 3 or 4 days old. So once the VPG starts, it's going to be a delta sync, what's called a delta sync, and it's going to synchronize it for a while, and it's going to get it caught up. But it will reduce the amount of bandwidth you need for migration. So,
All right, guys. We only planned on 20 minutes because that's all they gave us. I know we can't go too deep, so I do apologize. But do you guys have any questions before we end the session? No? All right. Well, thank you, guys.
Thank
have
you.
a good day.